Well, thanks everyone for making some time to be here this evening and to engage in this dialogue about such an important topic, the issue of creativity in young people's lives, and particularly the issue of creativity in the lives of boys. I think that many of the things that I will say tonight are applicable to girls as well as boys, but I'm trying to speak from a place of credibility, and I have spent my career as a psychologist working with boys. I didn't plan it that way. I never dreamed that was how it was going to turn out, but it seems that as soon as I hung my shingle after finishing at graduate school, that's who kind of gravitated to my practice, and I found that there was in general, a great shortage of people in my profession that were interested in working with school-age boys, because the main thing that therapists like you to do, to talk back, was the one thing that they didn't know how to do, right? They were just long silences, and it was difficult to form a relationship, but I kind of kept pushing forward. Before that, there were one experience before this that I want to tell you about, two experiences that really shape what I'm going to talk about tonight. One is that many, many years ago, growing up in Rhode Island, my parents raised me to be an artist. And I went to art school, and I learned a lot about art and art history, and I loved it, and I was absolutely confident that this was my destiny. Nothing else could ever be as important to me as being an artist. And I moved to Hoboken in the early 1980s when it was just getting gentrified, and I convinced my Cuban landlord, Raymond Furtado, to convert a bodega into a painting studio for me. Please do this for me, Ray. Please do this for me. And so there, a stone's throw from the tenement building in which Frank Sinatra grew up, I occupied a bodega, painting pictures that just a few days after I moved in, I saw all these eyes from the street peering through the plate glass windows. Who was this guy, and what was he doing in what used to be a place to buy fruits and veggies? Why is he in there? It was a rough neighborhood at that time. In the years that I lived in that building, 3 people were killed, not accidentally. That's why I eventually moved out. I was scared. And there was a sense of danger and of some alienation among kids on the streets. Most of them did not have paternal guidance, and they didn't have anything very interesting to do. I noticed kids were just killing time, just hanging out, and so naturally they would be interested in what I was doing in this store. I decided on a whim to open the door of my studio up and invite the kids from the street inside, because I thought that it would be safer for me if I made friends with the kids on the street than if I tried to hold them at arm's length. And I began to teach them how to draw and paint. It just was easy. I just passed out a few materials. I had lots of paper. We began to kind of make things. And at first I thought, okay, I got to kind of keep this contained. 20 minutes, we'll wrap it up. You guys can come back another time, but enough is enough. As the days went by, I found myself looking forward to the time when the kids would come in to draw and paint. And I found myself thinking about how I wanted to facilitate these kind of drawing and painting sessions. I found myself starting to read books about kids and understanding how they learn about how to draw and paint, and a little bit about child psychology. And then I almost had a complete breakdown because I realized that I had made the wrong choice in my life. I loved working with these kids. It was the first thing I ever discovered that I think I loved more than being an artist. And I was confused about what to do, about where I was supposed to go next. This was not part of the game plan for me. I trusted my instinct. I'm so glad that I did, that my true calling was to work with kids. And a year later, found myself going to graduate school and studying to become a psychologist. And when I finished school, I began working with kids, and especially boys who as I said earlier, I felt had relatively few mentors in their life and relatively few people that wanted to work with them. Good. I began to write books about the experience at a time when the concern about boys falling behind and all of their pathologies was exploding in the United States. And I ended up getting a lot of media, being on TV, being on more than 100 radio shows talking about the boy problem in the United States. I ended up doing a lot of talks. And at one point, I was doing a book tour in Australia with the International Boys Schools Coalition. And I spent a lot of time in airports talking to the executive director, and I kept saying, you know, somebody ought to study where boys find a sense of significance and purpose in their lives. We're only talking about the problems with boys. We're never talking about what's working with them. What really kind of motivates them, what draws them forward in life. And he said to me, well, why don't you do it? Which was a big kind of shock for me to think about. The next thing I knew, I spent 2 years traveling to 7 different countries, 4 or 5 different continents, interviewing boys about where they got a sense of purpose and significance in their life. So part of what I'm talking to you about tonight comes from those dialogues with boys in Asia, Africa, Australia, New Zealand, Singapore, the US, Canada, all these places, talking with kids about where they find these important experiences. Challenges early in life. It's important to do things together. When you interview boys about the most significant experiences in their life, they always say they're the things that I did with my friends. The things that I do with my friends, by definition, become so purposeful and meaningful to me because we did them together. So it's really great to get kids together, working with their classmates and their friends, and also focusing on skills, accomplishment, and context, really bringing kids into the here and now. So the kinds of activities that the Guild runs and that kids experience when they're doing all kinds of creative work, whether it be music or theater or writing or the visual arts, really bring them into the here and now. And increasingly, that's something that a lot of kids don't have an opportunity to do. We're always asking kids to think about the future. We're always asking them to prepare as though adulthood were some special time of life that was more important than childhood. As though there was more meaning in life to being an adult than to being a child. As though the ideas and intuitions and knowledge that you have as an adult is superior in some way to what you know as a child. And that is foolish. It's a different time of life, and we know different things, but there is as much wisdom among children as there is among adults, if we're willing to let it come forth. What's so important about creativity to contemporary children? First, the possibility of a diversity of life. We have talked a lot in our country in the last 20 years about cultural diversity, clearly a very positive thing. But we also should focus on diversity of life experience, what your life is about, the meaning of life. It's kind of a response to the monoculture that we all live in. The dominant narrative that drives the vast majority of people, in our culture at least, that we kind of don't even acknowledge overtly, but is still kind of there, always kind of guiding our decisions, determining what choices we make, causing us to think in particular ways about ourselves. One example of the monoculture in the United States is encapsulated in the word success, which is a very adult word that children almost never use. They never talk about wanting to be successful. Kids never say that. They don't use that word. They talk all the time about wanting to be happy. And they talk about how a person gets happy, what the path to happiness is. And in part, the message that I want to kind of convey tonight is that we help young people have a better chance of being happy when we give them an opportunity to live a life that is congruent with their core ideals and values. When they have more say, more input in shaping what their day-to-day life actually looks like. When we see kids who are unhappy or who are unmotivated, you can bet that the answer is not because they have a chemical imbalance. And it's not because their family doesn't have enough money. It's not because they haven't had, excuse me, it's not because they haven't had some special experience that everybody else has had. It's because there's a gap between their actual day-to-day life and what they imagine their ideal life to look like. That's how we increase motivation among boys, is we close the gap between what their day-to-day life looks like and their idealized life. We should pay close attention to children. It's a counterpoint to family enmeshment. We have never been closer to our kids than we are right now. Never closer. I know we talk about being like in a hectic, fast-paced society, but we are extremely close to our kids. Children in no time in American history have enjoyed this degree of intimacy with their parents for such a long time in many cases. That can be good. There is some value to that kind of closeness and intimacy, but it also can be suffocating. And it can be difficult for kids to go through the natural process of separating and becoming their own person with such a high degree of enmeshment. An opportunity to participate in making the world. That's really what kids want. That's why Harry Potter is such an interesting set of stories for kids. Because you get to be a wizard and use magical powers to save adults from themselves. That's interesting. That's worthy of a life. That's more interesting than soccer. It's more interesting than a lot of things. It's an opportunity to participate in making the world. Children want to do things of consequence. They may not articulate that, and they don't know how to say it in so many words, but they are aware of this kind of hierarchy, and they want a chance to make consequential decisions. And they could make a lot of those decisions and be much more active in shaping the world if we allowed it. A chance to march to your own drum. We know that boys like all of these things. These are the things that we've said about boys for years. They like structure, rewards, encouragement, books, ideas, action, excitement, fun, etc. What we're learning now is that significance is found in doing what can be observed, admired, and used by others. That's what I mean by a chance to participate in making the world. Building and creativity are dormant in many boys' lives because there is a kind of broad social anxiety that if we dedicate time to those sorts of activities, kids will fall behind in other critical areas. Many boys lack opportunity because they don't have a mentor, have never had access to a mentor to guide them through various types of creative work. When I talk about creative work here, I'm talking about the entire spectrum. The arts, certainly, all of the arts, certainly, but also other kinds of innovative and inventive work that is self-directed. Work that comes from the self, that is someone's personal idea and that is imprinted with their sense of values. Scale and difficulty are essential to significantly engage mind, body, and spirit. For most boys, bigger is better. If I get to make a big thing, it means something more than if I just make a little thing. So the scale is very important. Intellectual validation of a broad range of subjects desperately needed. Perhaps there is less urgency around this issue here in a place like New York City, a cultural mecca, where the arts are part of people's lives and they're visible and they're talked about and they're just part of the atmosphere. But broadly speaking, oh my gosh, I have spent now, 20 years consulting with schools, and over again the school newsletter talks about the athletic accomplishments of students. I'm a sports fan. I'm glad kids are involved in sports. I think that's wonderful, but what about the entire balance, all the other activities that are so important to a child's development? An ancient way of knowing. We know that drawing on the caves of Altamira, about 35,000 years old, give or take a few thousand years. That making of marks, that importance of creating a representation of the world is something that is fundamental to human experience. This is not a new idea. It's a very old idea. Sometimes we are misled in thinking that what children really need is a chance to unlock their kind of inner primitive self. I want to get so self-expressive that all the things I've bottled up can come, streaming out. I'll free myself in this way. When we look at boys who often kind of speak in a monotone way, it's natural to have this kind of intuition. Maybe we should try to open this kid up a little bit. But in fact, that's not really what kids want. What they really want is a chance to use art, I believe, boys, as a way of wrangling with the world and with knowing the world